I guess we're covering all the news today, at least it's discussed over water coolers and breakfast coffee. Immigration, education, and some say that in fact they are forever entwined in many ways. Tom Patterson is here, chairman of the Goldwater Institute, at least that part that is specifically interested in our education. And Tom, it's good to have you back.
Well, thanks, Pat. I feel very much at home here.
After all those years of talking to you as a representative of the state legislature, and of course you were regular with Sam Steiger when he had his program here, I spoke to one of the principals in the lawsuit against Ames testing just a few days ago, and she said essentially the problem with Arizona education is that there's not enough money per student devoted to their education. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. And that's the interesting thing that I want to talk about, is that there was a study that was done recently, Pat, by the Morrison Institute and the Center for Arizona Future, which are a couple of pretty straight-up groups, not right-wing like the Goldwater Institute. And they looked at what makes a successful school. And they found that, in fact, it wasn't things like how much money is spent per student. It wasn't even class size, teacher pay, anything like that. But it came down to the specific attitudes and practices in the schools. And they looked at schools that were successful, educating low-income, and in this case, Latino children. And they came up with a very different answer than the answer that we hear all the time, which is basically money and other inputs like that we're supposedly deficient in.
What was the answer?
Well, they came up with 6 things, but they are things like, first of all, these schools are really accountable for their results. They don't believe in making excuses. They believe in taking control of each student's education, and that's just their attitude. Their mindset is that they're going to make it happen. They really believe in testing. They never say, oh, we can't spend time teaching to the test. They welcome testing and say, this is how we get better, is through testing and assessment. They have strong principals with a lot of autonomy, but the principals are very good at bringing in the teachers and the staff and crafting solutions to the deficiencies and the problems in the school. So the teachers are bought in. It's not something that's imposed on them, what the school needs to do to get better. They also don't bounce around with the sorts of curriculum they want to have. They pick a curriculum, they work it and tweak it, but they don't change it. You know, they decide, in other words, they make a decision and they stick with it as to how they're going to specifically instruct the children. And finally,
the new math as opposed to the newer math.
Yeah.
And this is really new math.
I think the idea there is, you know, there are a lot of ways to teach children. And there's no necessarily one single way that's the only way to teach math. And I think there are better ways and worse ways, but the point is that they pick a way and then they stick with that. They don't, you know, every month go to a new thing because the old one wasn't working.
Consistency.
Consistency.
And what is the 6th point?
And the 6th point is that they individualize the instruction. That they don't have a one-size-fits-all, that each student is looked at individually, and it's sort of a whatever it takes for this student to succeed. If it's you know, tutoring, if it's counseling, if it's just bearing down on spending more time with homework, whatever it is, it's an individualized approach, and those are the things that work.
But doesn't it seem logical, Tom, though, that if one state spends $6,000 per student and another state spends $12,000 per student, it's not the only consideration. But it would seem to me that there would be some tremendous added advantages if you had more money spent per student on education.
Well, you may be right to a point, Pat, but you have to consider that some of the highest spending states in the country, including New Jersey, D.C., New York, spend, you know, several $1,000s more per student than we do.
Badly spent, from what I understand.
Their results are terrible. And it's because they don't have any of these real markers of excellence like turned up in this study going for them. And you can spend almost literally any amount of money and get no results at all if you don't have a focus on what really works in education. So you know, I would say that it takes some money to do well, but the private schools, even in our state, spend, you know, maybe on the average something like 2/3, say, of what public schools do, and many of them get excellent results. We don't hear much about them, but many of them do a fabulous job without the financial resources that our public schools have.
In New York City, the figures are stunning when it comes to not only the amount of money, but also the size of the administrative staff. And the Catholic school system in New York City really has had splendid results, and the public school system is in shambles.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And I think what I would say is this: we're focused on the wrong thing. Money is important. Obviously, you have to have money to run anything, you know, that's successful. But when the focus is exclusively on money, that's missing the boat. We've spent more money now by far than we have spent in past decades and past generations. And a lot of things have changed, Pat. I know that. It probably does take more money to run a good school now than it used to back in Ozzie and Harriet days. But this exclusive focus on money is taking our eye off the ball, and there's a reason why we keep spending more, but the schools don't improve, and that's because we're not paying enough attention to the things that really do work, that do matter in making education better.
I have 30 seconds. One of the biggest problems that we seem to have is to determine how it is that you teach kids to speak English so that they can maintain the same kind of consistent position in the school as the kids who use English as a primary language.
Well, I think it's a lot of that's the same point. You know, the whole discussion about that has been focused on the money, and I don't really think that it's so much a matter of money as being smart about using the sorts of techniques that people have always used to learn a new language. Basically, you get in with people that speak the language, you speak and use it all the time, and particularly for kids, they can become fluent very quickly.
Sounds like you're talking about education the way we learned it back in the old days of education. Tom Patterson, listen, this is so big a subject. I want to have you back. Much as I said to Roberto Medina, it's important not to gloss over these things. So please return, if you will, because this is a subject that has enormous impact on all of us here in the state of Arizona. What about, however, what about if we start by taking care of another member of the family in the most